welcome to the Startup Grind.
All right, Jeff. How's it going, man?
Going well.
There you go. Here's your water.
Thank you.
You're definitely going to need that. How you been? How you been? It's you look pretty good today.
You.
Yeah. So we always like to start our fireside chat on a personal note. So if you can sort of start, where were you born? Were you raised? What did your parents do? And maybe sort of talk about your first entrepreneur experience when you were like 3. I don't know.
So I was born in New York City, in Beth Israel Hospital, not so far from here, actually, on 18th Street. I think I spent my first year in Forest Hills, and then I moved from one part of Queens to Belrose, which is another. And then one of the things I had when I was a kid, when I was about 9 years old, I was very lonely. And it turned out that my loneliness that I had actually gave me a platform which I've leveraged even today.
Okay.
And then I basically stayed in Queens and moved to Great Neck, where I still reside today. So I've lived pretty close to the same location, but I have traveled the world. And my parents, my mom was a registered nurse. My dad was involved in the real estate business.
He was pretty entrepreneur. Your dad, right? I mean, didn't he have like a public company that he took a company public? No,
that was actually his brother, my uncle.
Okay, got it.
My uncle was in the 1950s one of the first people to get involved in cable TV, and he built a cable TV test equipment company, which he took public, I think, in '68 or '69. And it was my uncle, who was a ham radio operator, who taught me and sort of gave me my passion for radio that I still have today.
So yeah, I mean, you were 9 years old, and why don't you tell everybody, like, you learned Morse code, right?
Well, it didn't really happen on purpose.
Okay.
When you're 9 years old and you're like in 3rd grade or 8.5, whatever it was, and you don't have any friends, or at least you're very aware of other people, you just don't like them. And it's really hard to explain to your parents that these people are just ugh. So my dad felt bad for me, so he told me to look out for my uncle, to call him as if I would. But one day, luckily for me, I'm home from school. My uncle's waiting to see me, and he takes me to his factory. And what was amazing to me, and it sort of changed my life, was on that very day, he took me to his factory. And, I was pretty skeptical, 9-year-old kid. I go to a factory in Farmingdale. It's like, of course, everyone's nice to my uncle. He's the owner, okay? He shows me around, and it's like, whatever. But then the amazing thing was, in his office, inside his office, he had a desk. And he had this box on his desk. And he opens up this box, and he turns some knobs on it, and it makes noise. It turned out it was a radio. And I'd never seen anything like this before, never experienced anything like this before, but it was a ham radio It was a ham radio is what it turned out. And what my uncle did is he said some really cryptic words, which I now understand completely, but back then it was very like, what the heck? And so what he said was CQ, CQ, this is K2QQM calling CQ. And he repeated this 3 times. And because what he did is he had this radio, he had a microphone, he's talking into it. When he let go of this microphone for about an hour, there was a roar of voices waiting to talk to my uncle. And what I found amazing was it didn't matter what country these people were from, where in the world they were from, they all spoke English. And they all were there to talk to my uncle. And for 1 hour straight, he said his name was Fred, he's in Farmingdale, New York. And they were all excited about exchanging signal reports of how loud the signal was from one location to another. And after being there for an hour, I realized that my uncle had the cure for loneliness. It was this radio. And if I could simply take this radio off his desk and put it in my bedroom in Queens, I'd have friends, and I'd be able to turn the radio on at any time, day or night, and connect with people. And that would be, for me, that was going to be great. But the catch was this was a ham radio, and in order to use it, you had to be licensed from the Federal Communications Commission. And when you're 9 years old, I was pretty impulsive then. I really wanted the radio. My parents knew that, but I had to actually teach myself Morse code. I had to teach myself college-level physics in order to take the test, and then I had to also teach myself the rules and regulations to be a ham operator. So I failed at 9. I failed at 10, but when I was 12 and a half, I earned my license to communicate, and I haven't shut up since. and I'll tell you that being able to, when you're 12 years old and you're on the radio, I learned everything I ever needed to know about social media by the time I was 14 or 15. Because 4 words: listen, connect, share, and engage. When you're 14 years old and you're on the radio, you don't have much in common with any of the other people you're talking to. and they're all strangers to you. So if you're not engaging, if you're not listening, if you're not sharing, if you're not connecting, they're not going to talk to you. And so, but I grew up in a world very similar to the social media world we have today, where I could tune the radio dial, I could hear people's voices, I knew who they were. Most of these people I never met in my life, but I knew their personality, I knew their location. Much like if you look on Twitter, you know people's voices, even if you never meet them. It's so similar. And that's how I ended up investing in Twitter. It's because I saw...
Yeah, we're going to talk about that, yeah.
It was because of radio. It's because I saw Twitter as the radio of the internet.
I mean, so do you still have a radio in your basement talking to strangers? No?
Maybe.
Okay. Moving on. So, I mean, it's great. I mean, at an early age, you sort of learned how to communicate without the phone, right? And so this sort of is a good segue of how that gave birth to Vonage, right? So let's
there's a little bridge we need to do in between.
Okay, sure. Why don't you fill in the gap?
Well,
So
I do want to tell you that a couple of things. First, by being a ham operator, it did give me an opportunity to learn technology. I learned how obsessive I was with technology. My sisters to this day know how obsessive I was because I was the brother. Whenever we went on family trips, I always lugged 2 extra valises of radio equipment. We go on vacation to Barbados. We have 8 days of rain. I was so excited. I was on the radio for 8 days straight. Everyone else was miserable. We go to Hawaii, and I had so much fun. And these people were saying, "What the?" And I really enjoyed traveling. And I spent my entire time in the hotel room on the radio. I was like, "This is great." I didn't have to worry about getting a sunburn. I just was on the radio, and it was so much fun. And I, you know, and there was I had a friend in the Big Island, and we traveled Hawaii all over, and it was just great. But of course, you never know what people look like. You always visualize, and that part was fun. But what happened for me in the end was, as a ham operator, one of the things I learned about was emergency communications. I learned that I really enjoyed trying to relay messages in times of emergency, because one thing that hams are still known for today is in times of emergency, there's still ham radio. And I used to, any of you remember MASH, I used to pretend to be Radio O'Reilly. I used to always do phone patches connecting the telephone and the radio. And I was always fascinated with telephony from that perspective. And when I was going to college, I did some experiments. But when I was 15, I was in the interim years between 9 and 12 and a half. I was really fascinated with music. I mean, imagine being so lonely that you actually adopted the music of people whose friends you wanted to be with in order to have something in common with them. Or at least try. That's how lonely I was. And so, but I became really passionate about music, and I started building a record collection. And then when I was 15, I got my sisters to engage in some activities which I now could talk about. I don't think I'll be arrested. We ran a pirate radio station. And our call sign was WARG. That stood for "We Are Really Good." And I was Ray Haber, coming to you live from somewhere on the East Coast. And we operated on stormy winter nights and on federal holidays, thinking, of course, that no one from the FCC would drive around in white vans on stormy winter nights on Long Island or work on Fed holidays. How silly. But my sisters grew up traumatized. Whenever they see a white van, they still think FCC. And
truck?
Yeah, and it's just crazy times, and ice cream or not. And so, but it turned out that one of the benefits of being a pirate radio station and playing rock and roll music is you got a great record collection. And even though I was pretty lonely when I was 15 and I wasn't being invited to anyone's Sweet 16, I noticed that girls would pay me money to DJ their parties. So I ended up starting a production company when I was 15 that still runs today. That a friend of mine actually has been running ever since.
Called?
It was at the time it was called Kings Point Productions, but it's changed names a few times. But my friend's been a DJ now for all these years. Also, when I was a ham operator back in the day when the USSR was in existence, it was actually a state-sanctioned sport for people all over the world to wake up on Friday morning and spend the next, from Friday evening until Sunday evening, competing on the radio, talking to as many people as possible in as many different countries as possible. And as geeky as that sounds, I loved it. And that was my sport, if you could believe that. And so I used to compete in these contests all over the world. And I found it very tedious to create radio logs to figure out how to optimize all my communications. So conveniently, my father had a mini computer in our house, which I broke into, and I taught myself how to code. And I actually wrote some logging programs to automate my contesting. This, in turn, put me in a position to actually do consulting work when I was 16. So I ended up creating a consulting company because back in the days of Data General Computers, we had these engineers came to our house and every 30 days to do preventive maintenance because these were big monster machines. And they used to always tell me about the systems resellers, the VARs that were going out of business. And so I used to get clients, and my mom used to drive me to my clients. So I ended up doing consulting work. And then when I was about the same age, I was bar mitzvah on time value money theory. And I created a financial application for Data General Business Basic when I was in 12th grade. And so I spent 12th grade being a software publisher. So before I went to college, I actually had 3 companies. And so that was my entrepreneurial start. And the one thing which I can tell you about those days is no one told me I couldn't do it. So I did.
All right. We'll go straight into Q&A. I mean, that was awesome.
Okay.
Whew. So let's talk about Vonage. We only got 5 minutes left. No, this is great because the hand phone, the hand radio was sort of like, voice over IP was sort of like the next generation hand phone. Would that be a fair assessment when you first thought about voice over IP or voice over the net? Right.
I think back in we're jumping here, but I'll just
Sure.
try to frame it.
Okay.
Because there was this embarrassing moment I did have, which then got me to thinking about telephony on the internet. But when I was going to college, and my father passed away, so I can never ask him this question. But I don't ever remember applying to Hofstra University, where I graduated from. Because when I was a high school student, a senior, I didn't want to go to college. I mean, I had 3 businesses, and I was actually having fun. Granted, I was pretty still messed up, but I was having at least financial success. And but I ended up going to a local college, and which I don't remember applying to. And but going into my freshman year, I thought it'd be really cool to impress women with technology. So in 1980, I spent the summer of 1980 fixing up my Trans Am so that within a 30-mile radius of my home, I could do a phone patch over the radio, meaning I had a mobile phone in my car in 1980. And I spent my freshman year trying to get girls into my car to show off my technology. And it really didn't work out the way I thought it would. But surprisingly,
my radio, right?
No, it just did not work out. But 15 years later, I found myself in an interesting position because I ended up through a series of opportunities and just synchronous events, working, having a day job on Wall Street, working inside the World Trade Center on the 100.
That's right. You were at
Cantor Fitzgerald.
Fitzgerald, right?
But I had a 3-year job. It's like I'm a highly unemployable person. It was one of the few times in my life I worked for somebody. Most of the time I've hired myself and fired myself. But in that case I was working, and the first year and a half was great. The second year and a half was not so good. But in February '95, I was home from work the day that the software package became available, the first iPhone, from a company called Vocaltech. iPhone actually was built in Israel. It wasn't from Apple. It was from Vocaltech. And imagine being able to download some software where you can, if you're successful and you have it all working right, you might be able to talk to strangers on the internet. Most people thought it was nuts. Why do you want to talk to strangers? Of course, 20% of the people who were online on that day, around February 12th, 1995, they were using the ham radio call signs. So my ham radio hobby was reborn instantaneously. And all of a sudden, there was a lot of awkwardness because all of us hams were pretending to be on ham radio, talking over the computer via the internet, but using the ham radio signals and stuff. And it was kind of surreal. And but what I realized on that day was that voice was no longer a service. Voice was an application. And that was key. That there will come a time when we no longer have to pay for long distance because the internet made everything flat. And so calling goes flat, and so that was for me a big aha.
And so that's the beginning of Mini X, which is the exchange.
That was the beginning of the beginning, because what happened for me is, and this is all my night job. My day job is really silly to talk about, but it plays a big role a year and a half later. But in February '95, I started a mailing list, which was the iPhone mailing list. And for the record, I have no background in telecom. I've admitted to being a pirate radio operator. I've admitted to being a DJ and trying to teach myself how to code. And
right. And then even college, you majored in not even technology. It was accounting, right?
Really, accounting. I'm a gainfully unemployed accountant, for God's sakes, please. But I say this because in '95 I started a mailing list about internet phone, and almost overnight 3,000 people subscribed to this mailing list, and people for whatever reason were listening to my commentary, which is silly because what did I know? And this turned out, though, that this mailing list grew and grew, In September 95, somebody asked a question, is it possible to interconnect a telephone and a computer? And that's when I actually dusted off my very embarrassing device, my phone patch I used in 1980. It worked. So I go to my mailing list. I actually posted. You could actually, there are archives for this somewhere. You can actually see it worked. Well, the next day, somebody in Jakarta, Indonesia, emailed me, and he had written some software that basically took a Cirrus Logic chipset modem. Back then, there were two types of modems. Modems made with Cirrus Logic chipsets, modems made with Rockwell. And if you had the Cirrus chipset modem with a little bit of code, it actually turned into a one-port gateway. Translation, you're able to put two modems in your computer, one used for dial-up internet access, the other one to make phone calls. In November 1995, I accidentally launched what became the world's first internet telephony network. It was called Free World Dial-Up. And I never filed any patent claims on this. I still have no regrets about it, but I actually did create the first network, which, and I was an internet sensation back then, and people were able, hundreds of people all over the world made free phone calls through other people's computers. It got to the point where the business press was so crazy about this that in November 1995, the front page of the Sunday Times of London had a story about Bill Gates and the road ahead. The back page was about free world dial-up and the threat to the future of British telecom. It was hilarious. They took us seriously, but we were not scalable. We had no quality service, but that laid the groundwork for the ability to use the internet basically to bypass long distance. So it sort of sets a stage for Minix. Minix happened a couple of years later because in the interim, what happened to me is I ended up finding out, so I launched Free World Dial-Up in November. In March of 96, 300 phone companies went to the FCC and asked for the sale and use of internet telephony software to be banned in America and the makers to be regulated as phone companies. I thought that was funny. But hundreds of people on my mailing list said, what was I going to do about that? And it's like, hello, I have a day job, and I'm not a lobbyist, and what do you do about it? But I went out to my mailing list, and 10 days later, I created what's now known as the Voice on the Net Coalition, the VON Coalition, and for 9 years, we kept voice over IP unregulated, and this monolithic entity off the internet scared people, and that was March of 96. And
there was a lot of like startups that came off the back of that with free.
Oh, there were a lot
of. So a lot
of people copied it. There are a lot of people who were inspired by it. I think copying is just a sincere form of flattery, even if you don't get the patent claims. And
right. So I gotta be very wise picking my question here because like I ask you 3 questions, it's already done. So let's talk about let's try to bridge this gap. So from Mini X to Vonage, Jeffrey Crichton, is that his name? Crichton? Am I spelling that name, or am I saying it right? Is it Crichton? He's the first angel. He put about $1 million into your.
He ended up putting 12.
Oh, 12. Okay. So the question here is, so when did you sort of, when he sort of took the reign, and then you sort of took a back seat and decided to do sort of things, other things besides Vonage?
I do need a couple of minutes to set the groundwork for this, because what happened with I just need to just connect some dots. So, if 95 was all about dial-up, so we were dealing in a world. And how many people here were on the internet in 1995? So you remember dial-up internet, right? Bad quality service. We all pretended things were much better than they were. We still were addicted then. We're really addicted now. That was 95, and so what happened professionally for me is. I ended up taking this technology seriously. As a result, I lost my job. I got fired in July of 96. And if anyone ever gets fired, I'll tell everybody congratulations. Because in my case, as it turned out, getting fired saved my life. Yeah. And,
it did actually.
And I totally believe that it did. And so, and I ended up running, what I ended up doing in September 96 is I started a conference about voice on the net, where I brought together people from all over the world, from my mailing list, basically, who wanted to talk about it. To my utter amazement, 224 people showed up. Of these people, some of them would be billionaires on paper within a year or two. Many of them started companies which, before the dot-com crash, were worth lots and lots of money. And all I did was bring the people together. But that basically gave birth to an industry which today is worth over $1 trillion. Yeah. And when I started running the conference business, I noticed these entrepreneurs were getting together really in the hallways of my conferences, and they were doing something which I didn't understand at the time. But what a lot of the early entrepreneurs in voice over IP were doing were buying computers called gateways, and they were putting these in strategic locations like in Santo Domingo, in Tel Aviv, in London, in New York, in Paris, in Seoul, and they were using the internet to bypass long-distance tariffs and then making local phone calls in different cities. And what they had were very gray market minutes. And what at my conferences is people were getting together and trying to trade routes. So what I did is I saw that, and so the Minutes Exchange was an automation version of that. I basically, I happened to be an expert, or was, in fixed income securities, and I built trading systems. So the Minutes Exchange was really an automated version of spot market for these voice over IP minutes. And that's what, in 1998, that's what I started. Jeff Citron, when I met him in 2000, I only met him because all these other B2B exchanges were going public, and I felt left out. And I was disintermediating telecom, and I felt left out. And so he comes in, and I meet him in May of 2000. I previously, before meeting him, I actually signed office space in Edison, New Jersey, even though I was in Long Island. And what I was doing was incubating this company inside my other company. And it took about 9 months for the office space to be ready. In October of 2000, I told Jeff that the next startup I wanted to do was a broadband telephone company, because that's where I thought the market was going to go, because dial-up was already over and broadband was going to happen. And what happened to me was, as soon as they moved out, I got a phone call from Jeff, who told me that the Minutes Exchange was a good idea, but at most it'd be a multi-million-dollar business, and he wanted to make it a multi-billion-dollar business. So he did pivot, and so basically Minix became Vonage, and he stole Von from me. I have the trademark on Von, stands for Voice on the Net.
Right.
Vonage is the age of.
I was going to ask you about that, right? The meaning of the name. So
the age
voice
of
over the net.
This is the age of voice over the net.
Right.
And so my involvement with Vonage was basically chairman, and I attended a lot of the early meetings on weekends, and I met the team as it built. And I watched it grow, and then I basically kept away, because at that moment in time I was running the trade show, where I was doing business with all the competitors, and it was a very serious business for us in terms of revenue. So I felt that ultimately that I resigned from the board the day after we launched our service. I kept my stock, but I resigned from the board because I didn't want to appear to be biased against all the other companies that I was doing business with.
Yeah, I mean it's a very fascinating story. There is a lot of other stuff I'd like to cover here. I mean, you guys could kind of look on Wikipedia and get the backstory on this. What I really want to talk about was more the wellness part, recently. But let's before I go on to that, what do you think the future of voice over IP would look like? I mean, we have Skype, we got Google Hangout, Apple FaceTime. Is it going to be winner take all, or are they going to sort of have their own silo, and they're going to probably consolidate? I mean, what do you think is the future of Von or voice over IP? Yeah.
I believe that the future. I believe that voice will always be a killer app. Okay. At the end of the day, stand up for a second.
Sure.
Nothing replaces this.
Not true. No, you're right.
So so if you can't replace a hub like that, talking.
I feel good, man. It's awesome.
So I think talking is something which is also killer. That no matter how electronic we become, how mobile we become, how virtual we become. In fact, in 1996, and I was very jealous of all these people who had laws after their names back then, because I met Moore of Moore's Law and Metcalfe's Law. So I made Pulver's Law. I actually wrote it in 1996, delusional as I was. But what I wrote back then was, the more virtual we become, the more we need to have face-to-face meetings. I believe what I said back then is still true today. But how crazy does I have to quote myself? But I do believe that we are living in a time where there's a need for that voice. There's a need to bring things to a call.
Yeah.
And so voice, if voice is going to be a killer app, it will be a killer app no matter where you go, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's over devices, and to the extent that we can't tell the difference, fine. The people who are in trouble are the people who live in the big square states in America, because there's a lot of legislation going on in Washington that forever protects certain companies from going out of business, that are basically prevents disruption. So ultimately we lose, but that's a different political issue. But I have found that technology innovation sometimes is hampered by bad legislation, and is also hampered by bad laws which were put in place by monopolies to prevent future competition. And you see that in cable, and you certainly see it in telecom. So to answer your question, I think that as long as people want to talk to each other, there will always be a need for these companies to survive.
So I don't know if you saw that recent Pew Research that had said, you know, your personal interaction. So I think they did 20,000 respondents. They did a survey of them, and basically they said, you know, your personal interaction, what percentage of that is nonverbal, right? Which means texting versus like actually picking up the phone. And what they had found out was 90% of personal interaction was done through texting. So I mean, it's sort of interesting how you say, like, you know, the voice is sort of it's still the killer app, and you know, I think more it's more the interaction, the human interaction, seeing someone's face and seeing a smile versus like on text you can't really see that.
Plus, when you're texting 7 people at the same time, the other 6 people don't know you're texting 7 people at the same time.
Sure.
But you only can really talk to one person at a time.
Okay.
And so, even in an ADD HD world, you know, whatever, at the end of the day, if intimacy happens via text, intimacy happens however you allow it to happen. But I think there's a very personal touch point when you can actually reach out and literally and talk to someone. I think there's meaning with there. And I think that, you know, I don't want to reduce it, but I do think that connecting with someone matters, you know, and I do believe that, you know, we were able to today be much more intimate with our feelings and with our connections, and video definitely helps a lot. And I think that the advances we're seeing in broadband video, I mean, you know, the one thing which I love to say is, I'm just curious here, how many people here use FaceTime? And how many people here today have ever paid to use FaceTime? So what I would say is you're all welcome. Because
right, because of you, right?
Yeah.
Come on, right? I mean, come on, yes, we go.
Because
Voice RIP is free, because
11 years ago, your crazy friend over here had a vision that that I was from the future, and that because you know, after what happened in 96 with these 300 phone companies going after free world dial-up, I wanted to take a proactive stance. So in 2003, in January, I woke up saying, "Oh my God, you know, it's the phone companies are out to get us." That when they realize, when they wake up from the dot-com crash, the telecom crash, and the effects of 9/11, they're going to stop broadband, because broadband is highly disruptive to the future of phone companies. So I wanted to take a proactive stance. So what I ended up doing is I went to Washington, and I filed a petition. And to my utter amazement, my petition basically asked for clarity that voice communication that starts on the broadband internet that doesn't touch the legacy phone network, for it not to be regulated as telecom. Something I thought was pretty simple. So did my lawyer friends. So I wrote the petition, filed it. And anyway, my utter amazement, because it turns out that anyone can file a petition in America, but it doesn't mean the FCC has to act on it. Because my lawyers actually told me the day we filed, Jeff, you know, because I asked them, when's the fight going to start? And they basically said, listen, if you hear Martian signals in your ears, you can file a petition at the FCC to block them. It doesn't mean they're going to take action, but you could be satisfied by filing. But it's like, be careful what you wish for, because 10 days later, the FCC put my petition out for public comment, and about a year later, it was signed into law, and I became a subject down in Washington. And to this very day, voice over IP is not regulated in America, and voice over IP on broadband, it connects also on the video side, and is why you could do FaceTime for free. It's why Skype was able to be sold twice, why Viber got sold for 900 million last week. I can't take any credit for WhatsApp, but it provides a greenfield opportunity. And you know, what's ironic is that today the phone companies are trying to use my law not to be regulated themselves. So it's full circle.
So this is a really good segue to the next question, which is, I mean, you know, nobody's paying for a voice over IP connection, and so you know that the telecom companies are trying to find their angle to get money. So what do you think is the future of telecom? You know, so we all have phones. Do you think that we're going to have, the majority of us in this room, say in 5 years, are going to have data plan only, plans from AT&T or Verizon, versus, like, you know, the voice, you get, you know, 550 minutes. I mean, do you think it's going to be a majority data plan?
I think that the data plans are all messed up, have been for many years.
How can we improve it then? So if you were going to talk to the telecom companies,
we need more competition. At the end of the day, we need more competition, and we need reasons to be competitive. Every time somebody tries to be competitive, this is worse than Detroit. People who want to come out with better engines. Every time somebody gets to be competitive, they get gobbled up and killed. Innovation gets absorbed into this into this industry, but doesn't necessarily have a chance to sustain itself. You need in metropolitan areas alternative ways to deliver calls. You need ways so that, you know, one of the biggest fears is really what happens with net neutrality, because it's really net unneutrality. It's not net neutrality, it's the total opposite. You know, in the year 2000, 2001, I actually staged in Washington on the steps of the U.S. Capitol something called the Internet Freedom Rally. I did it to fight H.R. 1452 back then. Same laws, different legislators than now, but same fucked up way of doing things. It was, and back then I couldn't tell what side I was on, because if I take one side, then the other side starts spouting it, and it's like whatever. But there is a imbalance, because I advocate free. What I discovered with free world dial-up, by the way, is that there was no legislation in America in 1995 that stopped free telephony. AT&T wished they had it, but it wasn't there. Today. The trouble is that free doesn't ride so well if you've put trillions of dollars collectively in infrastructure. The phone companies and cable companies, rightfully so, want to return on their investment, because ROI for them doesn't mean return on inspiration. It doesn't mean return on innovation. For them, it means return on investment, because they have shareholders. And the fighting you always will see are people say, damn it, I just put this money down. I want a return. If you want to play on my pipes. So my attitude is, if a cable company wants to be paid for their pipes, redirect the traffic to the people who don't want it. But, you know, that's
great that you mentioned about that. So I don't know if you saw, there's this article or this research from Jive Communications called Future of Voice over IP, and the analyst had said that currently 2/3 of the phone plans are dedicated to voice, right? It's all voice, and then the 1/3 is data. So this was his theory. And how he thinks that the telecom industry is going to be disrupted. But we're all used to a $100 a month plan. He said that in the future we're all going to be running around with $25 plans. I mean, is that true? Because I'll be very excited about that for $25.
The trouble is we're racing to zero, and nobody wins. It's that. I mean, you know, the early days of voice over IP were built by people doing arbitrage, and we were arbitraging down to zero in terms of the profit margins being razor thin. You know, when ISPs basically introduced, I think it was AT&T that introduced. My friend Tom Evslin, when he was running AT&T as a service provider, he introduced the fixed pricing. That screwed it up for everybody. And ever since then, it's been a race to zero. I don't think that's where we go. But as to your point, everything is data. You know what? Everything has been data for a very long time, and we are data. So in terms of pricing plans, it really depends upon who the dominant personalities are and whether or not Congress will let companies fail. You know, if there's a concept, if Congress doesn't approach the lean startup model for telecom one day, then there'll be monolithic companies forever around that will be defying everything or relying around innovation, because the people who die are not going to be allowed to die, and that's going to screw it up for the innovators.
That was very tweetable. So let's get. I mean, we're short on time. So I mean,
sorry.
Oh yeah. So let's get right to the Zula, because I'm sure you probably want to talk about your new startup. How did you come up with this idea? What is it? How can we use it?
Well,
maybe in this conversation.
In this conversation, yes. If you haven't already done so, please download from either Google Play or the App Store Zula, and I believe you got an email to once you download it. I know you're in the Zula, to join in the conversation. So what Zula is all about is we built it as a platform for team communications. How many people here work with teams right now? Wow. Okay. So you're all, please do try this, and after this tonight, try it in your office, or try it with your team. Because if you're like me, you may find yourself inundated with email, where you're copied on so many emails with people you deal with every day. Sometimes people are sharing files with you every day. Then you have to prepare for a meeting, and then maybe someone else is joining the conversation. You have to re-forward files to those people. That's what Zula's for. Well, what I created with a friend of mine and a great team is a platform for people who basically, in my case, I grew up on a desktop, got a laptop, went mobile. I brought email along for the ride. My habits changed, but email didn't. And I basically said, screw that. So what we created was a place to basically have private conversations, where instead of having email, we have conversation streams. Inside the Zula, you could each Zula is a conversation, where the team leader will convene the team. It could be the entire company. It could be the finance department. It could be the dev department. It could be outsiders. With Zula, we don't differentiate by company domain. So if you have people in your company dealing with people outside your company, that's all fine. One click, you could be on a conference call, bring everyone together. One click, if you're the team leader, people you bring together, they don't need their contact details for anybody else. Through Zula, we actually have voice communications and messaging built in. We integrated Dropbox, Google Drive, Boxes in the next build. You can share photos as well, and you can schedule team meetings. And it's really designed for what I believe to be the mobile worker. And I'm co-founder, chairman. I'm head of new user acquisition. And any of you here in New York, if you actually like Zula, I'm happy to come to your office and show you how to use it with your team. Because I'm really what we're looking for right now is user feedback. It's not perfect. We know that. We're actually 10 weeks away from having an more amazing product. Our goal for 2014 is to go from good to awesome. At least what we're trying. And really what we're really about is that team communications. And for me personally, two things happened when we started the company. One is we more or less banned email, which you can do if it's your company. And our habits changed. The other thing was, and imagine me being sold on my own company, but in October, I was at a team meeting with the rest of our team, and in less time than it took for our VP of products to connect a laptop to her projector to show our roadmap, literally everybody on the team had the same file open on their iPhone. And I realized for the first time the world had changed, that there's a paradigm shift going on, and that I actually could be productive from my iPhone. I was like, hey, since that day, I have not taken a laptop to any meeting. And having that sense of independence from my laptop changes everything.
Okay, great.
So that's Zula.
We'll return after these commercial break, right?
No, but it's
sure.
But that's really
great.
where I came from, And so, because for me, if I didn't like it, I wouldn't use it. I've invested in over probably 400 startups, some of them my own. Right. But I don't actually plug anyone. I mean, I've yet to actually go public and really push Zula on anybody because I'm waiting. I have silver bullets I could shoot. Right. I'm just waiting until I feel more comfortable. I'm really just to catch up. But we have right now we're on iPhone and iOS. I'm sorry, we're on iOS and Android. We have a web version coming out next month, and we'll see what happens. But I do appreciate the feedback. Any bad, good, indifferent, we're listening all the time.
Great, awesome. If you want to pitch your startup to Jeff, bring him in to use Zula in your team. So remember hashtag StartupGrind at Jeff Pulver?
Yes.
So this is now the crux. I think the crux of this interview, I really wanted to talk about this, about you rebooting your life. Because this is a pretty, I've been reading articles about you, and they had talked about how you sort of reboot your life, and you had talked about this law of readiness. And so when did you decide to become more health conscious? Because in high school you were sort of the skinny guy, right? Pretty skinny, and then
I was.
Yeah, you were, and then a couple years.
I got fat.
You got fat. Okay. You got considerably big, and then
fat. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you decided to say, hey, you know what? I wanna just.
It's not that simple.
Well, it's not that simple. Okay.
I didn't wish to be fat.
Sure. But now it's like you look wonderful now, right? I mean.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. When did you decide? Like you had sort of like a pneumonia, and that sort of kicked everything off?
Really, what happened was, how much time do I have to answer this question?
3 minutes.
Real
fast. You got 5 minutes.
All right. So real fast. I was skinny until through college, and then over the next 20 plus years, I gained weight, a lot of weight at times, and really it was 2011. I became aware of my weight, but I got pneumonia, which actually dropped my weight. So it paid off but then I gained back the weight plus more. It was a bad way to diet. Coming into 2012, though, I knew that I had to change because I was living in pain. And, I don't remember the pain so much anymore, which is odd, but you just don't. It's like the last time you were sick. Do you really remember feeling sick? Because you feel good right now, so you feel good because your human mind lets you feel good. So, but I do remember in early 2012, if I had to walk 4 blocks, I took a taxi. If someone told me to exercise, I'd tell them I exercise judgment. All the time. I mean, I'm not kidding you. I would tell people I exercise judgment. But you know what? After a while, when you go to the movies, you always have to sit at the end because no one can ever get by you. when you go out to a diner, you always have to sit at a table because you can't fit into a booth. When you fly, you always have to. In my case, I had to fly. I could not fit into a seat. So whether I could afford to fly business class or not, I was basically flying very uncomfortable with the people next to me, suffocating them, or not knowing what to do. Or if you go anywhere, you stand out necessarily for the right reason. So I knew I had to change. And it took a lot of confidence for me to call my doctor. My family doctor is a cardiologist, so my doctor would always tell me to go lose weight, right? And so I never wanted to see him. But I finally went to see him in June of 2012, and I told him maybe I suggested to him that I should have gastric bypass surgery. To my utter amazement, he thought it was a good idea. It's not exactly what I wanted to hear. It kind of shocked me, actually. But he ran some blood tests. He saw that my triglycerides were like 265. But what he amazed him was I was overweight from a long part of my adult life, but I didn't have any secondary effects of being fat. So he told me that if I had the surgery, it would extend my life. And then I basically started to cry because I didn't want to have surgery. I started Googling this. This is terrible, yucky. And but then I didn't know what to do. And then it hit me. I knew exactly what to do. So it took me about 6 weeks. I spoke to a lot of my friends, asking them for advice as if they could tell me what to do. But my friend Mel Rosenberg, who's in Tel Aviv, he told me to bypass the bypass. Somehow that resonated in my mind, and that's what I did. I bought 41 books on health, wellness, fitness, and food. 41 books. And I discovered, maybe it's obvious, but I realized that everybody's a snowflake. Everyone's DNA is different. There's nothing, you and I and everyone else here, we have many things in common, but we're all different. And no one book has been written yet that 1 million people can read and 1 million people can lose 100 pounds, because it's not going to happen. However, if you want to raise your metabolism, which I wanted to do, you build muscle. Now, you're dealing with me. And how many people here have been to the gym in the last 25 years? Okay, I wasn't one of those. All of you have muscle memory. I started out with muscle amnesia. I kid you not, my trainer, when I ultimately had a trainer, he went nuts because I had no experience. My body had no experience mapping it was just crazy. So what did I end up doing? I ended up working out for 5 minutes a day every few days. That's all I could do. I had no stamina, I had no strength, I had no anything. That took me until the end of, that took me from July 24th to around August 24th. Then I joined the gym, and I had not been in a gym since 10th grade. And I was a lot older. I was turning 50. So that was my 50th birthday present, was basically to save my life. And so I ended up joining a gym. I then spent from basically August through the end of 2012 building my stamina up so I could work out up to about 2 hours, which was pretty crazy because I was a pretty big guy even back then. But I had a goal. Back in October, I made a sort of my own manifesto that in June of 2003, I wanted to do a one-arm push-up, and I wanted to lose 100.
One-arm push-up?
Push-up with one arm. And I wanted to, I wanted to do it in June 2003, and I wanted to lose 100 pounds. Now, after I decided to go on this journey, the thing was, I started the journey in July. I joined a gym in August. In September, I met a friend of mine in Tel Aviv, my friend Alon Ganor, who was the CEO of Vocaltech, that iPhone company. He's former CEO. He told me, Jeff, you should share your journey on Facebook because you don't want to disappoint your friends. You should open up and do this. Now, I didn't realize by him telling me to do that I would by accident discover crowdsourced motivation. I had no idea what would happen, but he thought that he was telling me to do this because I didn't want to disappoint my friends. Well, oh my God. So I actually waited. I didn't do it in September. October 22nd, I wrote this manifesto about what I wanted to do, and I discovered love. I mean, I cannot tell you what it feels like. I don't want to cry right now, but I feel it now. But I discovered love in the most meaningful, giving kind of way. I opened up and started to share, and I haven't stopped. And what happened as a result of that is people from all over the world to this very day have been sharing with me their journeys and their stories, or their cousin's stories, or their brother's stories, or their sister's stories. It's been absolute amazement, and the level of engagement you find. I mean, imagine walking down Manhattan 5 o'clock on a Sunday morning on a deserted street. That's sort of a journey on your own. Now imagine doing that journey during the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. With millions of people watching you on television, thousands of people cheering you on. That's what it feels like for me. Every time I go on Facebook and open up and share something, the amount of love I get from comments, from likes, from this and that. And I'm no fan of the like economy, But when you get 1,000 people liking something you do, it's like, oh my God. The big revelation for me was in November 24th, I showed one photo of doing a simple lat pull down. Very simple thing. Got 500 plus likes. I didn't think there were 500 people who liked me. And a lot of people don't, but they like the photo. And that's what it triggered so much. And over this period of time, what happened? I started losing weight. In December, I gave up eating, December 30th, I gave up wheat. I gave up sugar. And I had a dramatic change to the physiology of my body. In June, I did a 1-on push-ups.
You did? Wow, okay.
I probably still could. And I basically, to this very day, I've now outsourced 125 pounds. and I call it outsourcing because if you lose 125 pounds, you want to find it, right? You want to find it. And I've gone from basically being a size 46 pants to being less than a size 34.
Wow, that's lower than me.
3x,
Wow.
3x to probably a medium. So this is a large. I'm probably really a medium. I've condensed down and a little bit more efficient. And back in June of last year, I was able to bench press like 255, and I couldn't lift a 45-pound rod. So I mean, I started out with no muscle memory at all. I started out with nothing, and I learned a lot. I learned about the human body, and I learned a lot about food. And I've become. If you go on my Instagram, you'll find a couple of years ago, I used to love blueberries, but in the form of blueberry muffins, blueberry pancakes, blueberry bagels, blueberry pie. These days, just blueberries.
That's awesome. This is so entrepreneurialism and good health.
Yes.
You were saying they're related.
I believe so.
Okay. No, that's sort of like what I want to talk about because, changing our diets, can we become better entrepreneurs, right? I mean, I think that, you said you gave up wheat and sugar, so that means you got rid of Mountain Dew, Snicker bars,
Sure.
Dorito chips. That's like basic.
Actually, Doritos I think you can eat. I don't
Really?
know if
But the basic.
not that I do, but
These are basic food groups of hackers, right? I mean, how did you live past a day?
I do have coffee.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you about coffee, because you're able to still drink coffee.
I'm highly addicted to many things.
Okay. Sure. But no, the thing is, I guess what I wanted to talk about was, if you're looking after your diet and you're well, you had mentioned that you started to become more creative. Like so.
Well, I'll take you through the steps.
Sure. Okay.
How many people here? I'm just curious. In the last couple of years, anyone here given up wheat? Anyone? So maybe your experiences may be a little bit different than mine, but there are people here who can verify this. So let's see. I gave up wheat on December 30th, 2012. Within 10 days, I felt more energy. I actually felt like a golden glow of energy, which is kind of surreal when you see it, when you feel it. 3 weeks into it, I stopped getting hungry and I stopped getting cravings. About a month into it, a little more than a month into it, I stopped noticing that I don't get jet lag. Then I grew up in a world thinking or assuming that everybody had stomach problems, so my stomach pains went away, my acid reflux went away, I started sleeping, I had sleep apnea, that basically went away. And then, about 2 months into it, a crazy thing happened. I don't know, how many people here think in the shower? Come on.
Everybody raise your hand.
No. Only 5% of the world does, but more people here. I'm very creative too. Most of my ideas have always come from the shower. I don't know how it is. And without my glasses on, when I stare at tiles, I always saw certain patterns. My entire life, the same patterns, right? I started seeing new patterns. My brain changed. I actually see the world, experience the world differently. I have a much more acute awareness of everything else around me. And then in August of last year, I visited my nephew at summer camp, who I noticed was having horrible summer allergies. And I realized for the first time in 20 years, I have no allergies. And then I don't look like I'm 8.5 months pregnant. So that all went away. And so I attribute that to both giving up wheat and not adding sugar to my diet. And I also noticed that I actually eat vegetables now. I mean, I used to love ketchup. Now I love tomatoes. I never would eat tomatoes before, ever. My entire taste, everything have changed. I mean, everything.
So, do you feel that you become more creative, like, even when you're dealing with some of the startups you're advising, even with Zula, are these ideas, you see it more clear? I mean...
Yes, I mean, it is almost psychedelic to explain this, but I have a much higher clarity. Okay. And a much higher sense of awareness. and a much higher sense of being. I just, there's something that's different, which having nowhere, because I wasn't doing so bad before, but I'm feeling at a much higher level, many levels. There's also a higher sense of, I'll call it spirituality, but I'm very sensitive to energies of people and of things, and I could see things differently that I could never could do before, and it's just crazy and surreal when it happens, but I embrace it, and I believe in it, and I've become a big fan of my motto is basically live life now. You know, yesterday's history, tomorrow hasn't happened. Enjoy what you have, because it may be taken away. So live life now, and hopefully you'll enjoy that.
Okay, I want to really switch gears here because we'll open up some Q&A through the app. I hope you have the app open because I don't have my.
Oh, sure.
But before you do that,
I know there are 2 people here who downloaded before.
Okay. So let's talk about your angel investing, because I'm sure a lot of folks are.
I thought you want to talk about failures. Okay.
No, I will get to that. Definitely. That's the last question. So if you talk about how you got into the Twitter deal, because this is sort of an interesting story. Back in 2007,
how I really got into it?
Well, what you told me over the phone.
Well, that's how I really got into it.
Okay, yeah. So let's talk about it, because I think this is an interesting story, because it's you sort of used the social media to get in on it, right? It wasn't like you may have knew Fred before, but it was sort of, you knew about that through social media. So let's talk about that. How did you hear about Twitter? And that's obviously your biggest ROI on your investment, right?
Other than maybe my own stuff.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, no, it is by far, and it makes me look so smart. Although at the time, you never know. I saw that, I happened to be online the moment that Fred Wilson tweeted that Union Square Ventures led the Series A round for Twitter. So I sent him a direct message saying, can I join? It took him 2 days to respond, and there's a very famous story of the person who declined, or the persons who declined, but 2 days later I get a message saying I'm in. And that has had a substantial change to how I look at Twitter. But seriously, it was, the fact is, you see an opportunity, you go for it, right? He could have said no. One of the things my dad used to always tell me when he was alive, my dad died in '98, and he used to always tell me, if you don't ask, the answer is no. I felt that was my dad talking to me. Because if I didn't ask, I wouldn't have become a Series A investor in Twitter.
Yeah.
And if I didn't ask, I definitely would not be so obsessed with stock price today. But I really advocate speaking up and asking. I believe that, because my dad died of cancer in '98, he died of lung cancer and brain cancer. But when my father smoked, cigarettes back then had warning labels saying, smoking can give you cancer. One of my biggest challenges, which I haven't figured out how to tackle yet, is that the life expectancy of some people in America and inner cities today is less than mine, because obesity is becoming a big problem. Because people are eating with ignorance. At least if you smoke, you're warned something bad can happen to you. We haven't figured out yet how to get kids in the inner city to eat better. I hope we can. And one of the things, one of my own goals through this technology we have is to basically do that somehow, message, and get the word out, because you don't have to have bad food choices, and we can live better lives. We just have to be smarter about it.
Okay, really quick, so we can give nuggets here to the crowd here. What do you see in startups when you decide to invest in them? Do you have an investment thesis?
I do.
Okay, what is it?
Music.
Okay, explain.
I look at every startup I look at it as a rock band. Okay. I want to know who the lead singer is. I want to know who the drummer is. I don't care whether or not a lead singer, because lead singer in bands, they can play an instrument or not. The CEO of a company doesn't have to write code. The drummer sort of sets the beats, like the COO. I want to know whether or not the startup is a cover band, whether they're playing original music. I want to know what genre they're in, or they're creating their own genre. And the thing is, I used to have a record label. I can tell you the reason why I invest in bands was to get to the third record. Because by the third record, it's usually when you get the great returns. I invest in companies to get to the third pivot. I want to be with people. I want to find people who have what it takes to find themselves. And I consider myself an OBGYN investor. Anybody know what that is? That's right. I invest when companies get conceived. I look at the DNA of the company. I'm not an angel. I'm not I deal with OBGYN. I deal with the moment the companies are getting together. That's when I look to get involved. the bulk of my investments, good, bad, or indifferent, happened there. Where I failed miserably is anytime I ever went large in a startup, basically I failed. I've lost millions and millions of dollars going large. Where I've had a sweet spot is like I have an agreement with God that I can do a $25,000 to $50,000 investment and I can get a great return. If I go greater than a certain amount, doomed for failure. So I tell most startups, don't worry, I'm not going to doom you. I'm not going to invest and it'll be okay.
So that's a great one because we'll talk about your biggest failure. I mean, I'm sure it was related to startups, but what was your biggest failure and how did you recover from that?
Well, part of my biggest failure happened before I actually left, while I was leaving Wall Street, before I lost my job. I found myself in '94 with the idea for a company very much like Hotmail, but I let people I was talking to, who I called friends back then, convince me not to do it. I had another idea for a startup to do, who would have been the first mortgage banking company on the internet. Someone else convinced me not to do it. My biggest failure really came from not listening to myself, from not listening to the voice inside me. And I believe that many people suffer from an imbalance between their heart, their soul, and their head. And that, for whatever reason, we're not able to feel what we know, and we have to rationalize it, but we can't act on it. And so my biggest failure really came from not having the confidence to be who I am. That aside, I've made blunders. Whenever I did a startup where I went large, where I put millions of dollars in, and without any venture funding next to me, we lost. Every time. Every time. Now, the thing is, I will tell you, and we don't have time to go into it, but I've been on the edge several times in my life in the last 15 years, where I had nothing, where I had no one to believe in me, I had nobody to invest in me, and I went around looking for money and no one was there. So I realized the best gift you can ever give anybody is to believe in them. And for me, to be the first person into a startup, that's the gift I can give. So when someone's raising money, even if it's an early stage company, if they already have those believers, they don't need me. I'd rather take the money, if I'm fortunate to have money to invest, I want to find that person to be the first person to believe in. And that's where I go with that. So in terms of my failures, I have many, and I've learned from a lot of them, but really it's failure to listen and to believe in oneself. It continues at some points to really hurt me.
Okay, we're going to open us the Q&A through the app.
Okay.
You guys were warned. No raising hands. It has to go through the app. So we have a lot. I mean, it looks like we...
No?
No?
Oh, we have one.
Oh, come on. All right, great. Can you read it?
Sure.
All right, this one? Okay, you covered net neutrality?
Yeah.
Okay. So Carlos Dennis, raise your hand. All right, thank you for downloading the app. Okay, you covered net neutrality, but I still worry that the telcos are hell-bent on destruction. What can entrepreneurs do to help maintain net neutrality?
Well, we can actually change the definition in the game. We can speak up. How many people here have been to Congress and testified? Come on. Really? How many people here? Really? No one? Well, thank you.
Over there.
Thank you. I mean, the first part of this really is all about is sharing your voice. Your voice matters. Understand your opinion, good, bad, or wrong. It doesn't matter. You have a voice. You're alive. Speak it. Right? If you want to change legislation, let people know that you're here. Be counted on. All right? That's key. I'm sorry. So, because when you outsource that to other people will let their own motivations drive themselves, and you may not be represented the way you want to be. I have a great deal of respect for the congressional progress, for the processes we go through, but I was willing to have my ass on the line, really attacked during the creation of the Pulver order, and then going to Congress and having a lot of fun with John Sununu and with McCain, and John. It was fun, flattering, and very humbling. But you have a chance too. There's nothing about me that stops you. There's nothing about anyone here that stops you from having your voice. You just have to want it. So do it. And that's how we do it. The phone companies are counting on you sitting on your ass and doing nothing. The longer you let that happen, the longer they will win, and you may lose.
So if you're going to go to DC, that's my chapter. So you'll have an extra room for you. So try to get to testify on Congress. So we have another.
I'm looking.
All
Oh,
right.
I have a few more. Hey,
We got a few
I'm
more.
popping
Okay.
in.
Once you. Okay. Let's see.
It's very nice.
Right.
Please use this at home.
You spoke about the race to zero. Where do you see the future of employment with tech making the world so efficient? So we're going to a singularity.
No, well, I think that there's, I mean, we can take it different ways. There's no doubt that the world leaders 25 years ago knew about this, that they saw the internet coming and the new industrial revolution happening, and they chose to do nothing to prepare their economies for the efficiencies that were going to come. Well, it's happened, right? I mean, it's not like people got blindsided by this. It all happened anyway. So there's an opportunity to retool, to relearn, and to reboot. Whether you're rebooting your body, rebooting your career, or rebooting your opportunities. I think you have to change the way you look at the world. And maybe the world will change the way it looks to you. So yes, there's a race to zero in one area, but there's so many great opportunities in many other areas. And I don't think the race to zero is necessarily a dead race. But it's certainly not one that I would spend a lot of time competing in if there was more ways, more channels to be successful. And the nice thing is that every time something is disruptive in a marketplace, the marketplace usually rebounds. If you remember everyone crying when VCRs came out and all those people were fighting it, or frankly when radio came out, and what was happening to live music, or when TV came out, what happened to radio, and the internet. I mean, yeah, the lobbyists love to lobby, and they live with fear. But innovation prevails every time. And I believe that the good guys will win again. I think that the opportunities will surface, and then the obvious is what happens. And in between is a good commentary for someone else to worry about.
Okay, we got, I think we're done with Q&A.
Okay.
Unless there's a question you like. I have two other questions here.
Go ahead.
Okay, so these are the two last questions we always ask. So number one, if you could rewind 15 years, back, and you're sitting in the audience here, and you're listening to a badass founder, what kind of advice would you be giving yourself?
Don't listen to anybody else. That nobody knows you the way you are you. The best anyone could ever do is tell you what they would do if they were you. But unless they have a supernatural ability to put their bodies inside yours and to feel your soul and to look through your eyes and have your exact life experience at that moment in time, their advice is meaningless. You got to learn to be you and have the confidence to be the you that you can be, not the you that you think other people see you as. When you wake up in the morning willing to accept who you are, and you will be.
That's a pretty good moment right there. So one last question. This is probably our last, this is our most important question, by the way.
Okay, should I stand up for this?
No, you're not standing. So, last question is, who's your favorite superhero or / historic figure, and why?
Mark Twain.
Okay, why?
I love his quotes. I absolutely, when I'm looking on Facebook, I spend so much time trying to share something, share an idea, and in the last couple of years, his quotes, what he said a long time ago, still resonate true with me today. And I think that's amazing, to be able to find voices. There are a lot of other people that have great quotes, but he's so profound that I'm truly a fan.
So you've always obviously told me this answer, and then typically what we do is we get a poster, but for you, we actually got a Mark Twain book of quotations. So I'm going to start trying here. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's Pulver.